Straight from a posh hotel room at the Beverly Region Hotel. You know, the hotel where the Beverly Hills Cop film was filmed at. Anyhow, comes today's podcast of Art School Confidential. Howdy. I'm Jeff Goldsmith, senior editor for Creative Screenwriting Magazine, and we have a slightly new format for today's podcast in which, rather than being conducted as a Q&A in front of a live audience like we usually do, we got a one-on-one interview with comic book writer and artist and screenwriter Daniel Clowes about his new film, Art School Confidential. The danger, of course, for these kind of podcasts is that a publicist armed with a pistol is likely to barge in at any minute and cut your interview about 10 minutes short without notice just so that they could move on to the next set of interviews, which almost happened here, but I'm happy to report was ultimately avoided. In fact, the entire fight and scuffle for said pistol was successfully edited out as we were afforded that rare opportunity of a one-on-one sit-down with Mr. Clowes, whose work as a comic book writer and artist and screenwriter, I gotta say, I've always admired. I mean, let's not forget that his collaboration with director Terry Zwigoff for the 2001 film Ghost World is in fact the first comic book adaptation to gain an Oscar nomination for Best Adapted Screenplay, and simultaneously also marked the first time an actual comic book writer and artist was nominated in the process too. Quite a feat actually, whereas my digital recording of this interview was certainly no feat of any sort because we weren't recording this in a theater. I was forced to use a DV cam as my recording device, and while I aimed it perfectly at Mr. Clowes, who sounds great, I'm happy to say, of course it was a directional mic, and I ended up sounding like I was conducting my part of the interview, possibly from the same Beverly Hills restroom where musician George Michael was originally arrested, which really wasn't the case here, as we were, in fact, in a posh Beverly Hills hotel room. So I apologize for the audio inconsistency, hope to get better equipment to record with someday soon, but of course, would hate to have you hold your breath for such a day, because it doesn't look like any new equipment is heading my way too soon, but hey, it works. Clowes is still a great interview and a hell of a talented guy, and really, he sounds great, so it's just my lack of a mic that is the problem. And hey, with no proper transition whatsoever, I encourage you to stay tuned after the podcast for information about how you can get your questions answered in future podcasts with History of Violence screenwriter Josh Olson, The Grudge screenwriter Steven Susko, Wedding Crashers co-writers Steve Faber and Bob Fisher, and of course, Mission Impossible 3 co-writers Alex Kurtzman, Roberto Orsi, and schedule permitting J.J. Abrams. But now, let's flash into our interview with screenwriter Daniel Clowes talking about his new film, Art School Confidential, based on the comic he created.
So we're going to just go through your career. Thanks.
Sure.
Thanks for coming out today. Thanks for giving us the time. To my knowledge, your first brush with Hollywood was doing the poster for Happiness. Is that correct? Or
I suppose that was. I don't think Hollywood had anything to do with it. That was a very New York kind of low budget production. It was all through a company, Good Machine, that was run by Ted Hope and James Shamus out of New York. So, but I guess, in terms of Hollywood encompassing all of the movie business, yes, that is true.
Had you been approached by anyone before that for the rights to any of your properties, or had you considered yourself a screenwriter before that?
No, not at all. I mean, I'd never written a screenplay. I'd always been interested in working in movies or doing something with movies, but it seemed like such a distant prospect. And drawing comics, you're able to do the whole thing yourself. You just have to buy some paper and a few pens, and the expenses are under $10 to draw a comic, and you're in control. You make a movie, and you have to rent out crew members and cameras and lights and all that. It seemed like it was not going to be possible, so I never really considered it seriously.
So what was the genesis for basically Ghost World getting off the ground, which to my knowledge is your first brush with Hollywood? If there was something else that I'm missing.
That absolutely was. I was just, Terry Zwigoff had made his documentary Crumb, and he wanted to make a fictional film, a narrative, and he was a fan of my comics and just thought I would be, a good collaborator for something. And he didn't necessarily focus on Ghost World originally. He just sort of liked my work in general and kind of invited himself over to my house one day, and we sort of hit it off immediately and very slowly kind of gravitated towards Ghost World, and then spent a long time kind of adapting it very directly from the comic, just sort of doing a kind of a straight adaptation, and it just wasn't quite working. And then he had the idea to introduce this Steve Buscemi character into it, who's just a very tiny character in the comic. He's literally in one panel, I think.
So you guys were fleshing out the story. Did you start traditionally with an outline, or was it a conversation, or did you know that you were going to begin writing a screenplay at that point?
Well, no, we knew we were going to try to write something, and we had met with Terry's producer, Leanne Halfin, and she encouraged us to start right in. But I had no idea how to do it. I had never written a screenplay or never even thought about writing one, and so it was really a process of trial and error. We just started writing and waited to see where the story took us, and then we'd always get kind of stuck halfway through, and then finally we decided, well, maybe we should write an outline, and we wrote this absurd long outline.
How long was it?
The way I work is, in doing comics, I have a very idiosyncratic way of doing things like outlines, and I'll just take the biggest piece of paper I can buy and try to write every element of the story on this one piece of paper, and then draw all these little arrows connecting everything together. And it's, just
kind of like making note cards on a piece of paper.
Kind of, yeah, but it's like insane hieroglyphics that no one else can understand. And I remember going to a meeting with Terry and this producer and bringing in this giant piece of paper with all these notes and saying, yes, I figured it all out. Here it is. It would have been like a 9-hour movie.
But actually, your process as a comic book writer and also making the comic, you would kind of, one would think that you would need to know where you're going, and an outline would be helpful because you're going to be illustrating it, you're going to be laying it down. So I would think your work of writing a comic is done before you start, or
because you really lose a lot in a comic when you do that. The sort of, to me, the thing I really like about doing comics is that there's this thing that kind of happens as you're working. When you're making a movie, you have to have a script, and then you film the scenes, and then things kind of happen on the set, and you have to kind of respond to those things that are happening. And in a comic, you're creating the pictures and the words kind of almost at the same time, and they influence each other. You draw a face of a character, and it suggests a different line than the line you have for it. And I find that I have a very loose outline when I'm doing comics, but I have to be able to go off in all kinds of different directions, or you lose that spontaneity that makes it interesting.
There's that old adage, we use it all the time: nothing's truly written, things are only rewritten.
Mm-hmm.
When you're doing that as a comic book writer, are you able to just interchange the panels as needed? I mean,
to me that's the great appeal of writing a screenplay or a novel as opposed to a comic, because in comics you're bound to this kind of spatial form where if you draw something in a panel on page 2 and you want to all of a sudden put an extra panel on page 1, it's not like you can all of a sudden just shift the panels over. They're not a loose grid. They're all sort of worked into the design of each page. So you can't really insert new material into the middle of a story without redrawing everything. So
have you done that? I mean, is there a way to rewrite a comic?
Only that involves redrawing. I mean, you can rewrite dialogue, you can paste over word balloons and things like that. And I've certainly gotten to the end of a story and realized, there's one little bit of information that I haven't quite gotten across, and I've gone in and found a panel that I could add a word balloon where it's like, by the way, your father, the doctor, was also the mayor of our town. It's something like that. So, but it's very difficult, and to me, that's part of its beauty, is that you're kind of circumscribed and you can't go back and do all that stuff. It's much more spontaneous in a certain way, and it's the beauty of really good comics is that they kind of happen in front of you on the page and they seem alive to some degree. And often comics that are scripted very tightly in advance and then illustrated by somebody else often, to me, have a feel of being dead on the page. They don't have that life.
Some authors have a lot of trouble adapting their own work because they're too close to it. When you were doing that in both these cases, was there ever a moment where you just knew, like when you realized it wasn't working, you had to introduce the Buscemi character in Ghost World, where you just said, you know what, I've got to completely depart and almost do a rewrite finally as to what I'd originally done? Just talk about coming to that realization.
Yeah, I mean, when I first started, I actually just thought this will be an easy way to make money. I didn't think it was going to be fun. And I thought, well, I've already written the story. All I have to do is transcribe the dialogue and write some descriptions and, cash my paycheck and that will be it. And then, of course, as is my way, I got more and more kind of obsessive about it and got more and more interested in it. And so, of course, I started changing things. But I was still trying to be beholden to the book for some reason. And then I realized, I don't have to do that. I'm the author. I'm the one I'm insulting by not being beholden to that. I'm not hurting my own feelings.
And you've lived with the characters. I mean, so
I lived with the characters, and any author will tell you that when they're writing a narrative, they think of all these other possible scenarios for these characters, and they think maybe this is a better way to go. And you never are quite sure that the one you picked is the one that you should have stuck with. And so, in this case, I was able to use all these elements that I had to abandon in the comic. All of a sudden, I had a way to kind of work them into the story. And so it gave me a new opportunity to look at the story and see sort of a different version of the same summer with these two girls.
Really briefly, because we are moving on to Art School Confidential, I promise, but how long did it take you and Terry to get your first draft that you started bringing out? And what was it like to set that up?
Set it up with the studio, you mean?
Yeah, or just to get enough to find funding to make it.
We were actually, because Terry had such a hit with Crumb, we actually got paid to write the script. It wasn't a spec.
Okay, great.
So we had gotten money up front. Eventually, it took us a long time to talk somebody into that.
Right.
So,
how was it? Was it a difficult
it was
process?
It was quite a while. I believe it was at least a year and a half before we had something to turn in.
Well, because it's interesting because you represent a genre of comics that isn't superheroes, and it's people would call it alternative comics. I mean, I think it more represents a good drama sometimes. Because we've seen this trend lately with Road to Perdition, History of Violence recently,
right.
But it's no surprise that you got an Academy Award nomination, a WGA nomination, and won a Spirit Award for the great work that you guys did on Ghost World. So, I mean, congrats on breaking through with that niche that really is still pretty underrepresented.
Yeah.
But how long did it take you to write it?
It's very hard for me to remember because it was such an on and off process. I feel like we worked about a year and a half on the first draft,
wow.
and then we turned it in, and then we did rewrites. But it was we were in that same time period we were trying to get funding for it. And we were sending out the first draft for that, and so we were sort of working on it as we were desperately, trying to get somebody to make it, and that took at least 2 years from when I think we turned it in around 1998, and it wasn't until 2000 that it was made, and we were constantly rewriting. At a certain point, Terry got sick of it, and so I just got obsessive about it. I was rewriting and rewriting it, and of course, I thought, when I finished it, I thought, like, this is perfect. Every word is perfect, and then literally the first day of shooting, we cut out a page of stuff. Yeah, and it was like that was my awakening to how it really works.
Well, that's great you were on set. A lot of writers don't get to go on set.
No, Terry had me the whole time I was there.
Did you guys do a lot of rewriting while on set? On both films?
Every day. Yeah, no, both of them every day. Yeah.
So even on Art School?
Yeah.
What kind of stuff would you find rewriting more? Dialogue or story points, story structure?
There was, in Art School, it was sort of more fun because we actually added stuff. At Ghost World, it was such a quick shoot and it was such a long script. It was really...
How long was it?
Well, we sort of cheated on the format.
Right.
Like really intensely. Like now when I look at a real script, like a typical Hollywood script, and I look at a script for Ghost World, it's like one of them is like 10% gray on a page, and Ghost World's like 60% gray.
Wow.
It's so dense. It would have probably been like 150 pages real in a real final draft format. We actually typed the whole thing in Word. We were so retarded, and so we just it was impossible to shoot all this stuff,
right.
And so we were just chopping right and left.
So just cutting and condensing.
It was just cutting and condensing. So it was having to figure out how to put two scenes into one. And
was there any lost scene? We always love hearing about lost scenes that to this day you wish you could have gotten in.
There was nothing that we didn't shoot. We shot some stuff that didn't make it into the film that I liked as scenes, but they didn't work in the film.
Confirm that this is true. I'd heard that you had written the entire sitcom that plays in the background in Ghost World.
I wrote about 15 minutes. I just couldn't stop.
Really?
Yeah.
So how, like 15 pages worth at least? Or?
It was like 10 pages. Yeah. I found it recently and I was laughing my head off. It was just, I tried to write like a late 80s kind of, titillating sex comedy kind of a thing.
I mean, how much of it?
I just wrote all that. I wrote like the movie trailer and all that stuff.
And the commercials too, right?
Yeah, because that's the kind of stuff in a movie that's often, you can tell is not written by a writer. It's just like somebody making it up in the recording studio, and so I want all that stuff to be exactly right.
Well, it was great texturing. I mean, what percentage of that sitcom would you say the bad sitcom ended up in the movie?
It's 3 lines.
3 lines?
Yeah.
Are you going to ever release that on a DVD?
I would love to. I'm not sure I've even ever heard the whole recording we used. Originally, there was a whole nother scene where you just see them watching TV for like 30 seconds with Rebecca's grandmother, and you heard almost 3 or 4 pages of it there. But
if you could dig that up, maybe as a part of this podcast, we're happy to throw it up on our website so the world could see.
I don't know about that.
All right, consider it.
I might want to save it for the next film.
That's not a bad idea.
Or maybe I'll sell it as a sitcom.
Honestly,
if we go back in time,
if you wrote it to be bad, it'll probably sell instantly.
Yeah, no, it had that feel of like, I should just write like this more often. This is very commercial.
Art School Confidential. You went to Pratt Institute in Brooklyn. Did you ever believe your experiences would make for a movie?
Not a movie necessarily, but as I was there, I had this awareness that this was going to be a formative experience for me, and it would be something I would think back on quite a bit. I mean, I used to actually like take pictures of my roommates and stuff and tape record people. I had this awareness, like, I'll never be in a situation like this again, where I felt like an undercover cop in some ways.
That's cool. I mean, that's a perfect writer's answer, actually. Yeah. And your writing is very character-driven. I mean, obviously, Enid and Rebecca are, the soul of Ghost World, and here it's all about characters. Could you talk about approaching your writing from possibly more of a character perspective than plot, or does it just not fit that way in your head?
Well, to me, that's, the characters are the beginning of the story. I mean, I can't just write based on a plot. I can't write the kind of thing where you have sort of a character who fits into some schematic series of events. I'm interested in sort of exploring what these specific characters will do in specific situations. And so I have to really have the character fully in mind before I can start writing. And I actually found on this film that I was kind of trying to get going on it, and I was really having trouble getting started. And I realized it's because in Ghost World I knew these characters visually before I wrote the screenplay. I'd done them as comic characters, and here I was. Art School Confidential is really not based on the comic strip Art School Confidential. That's just sort of a series of just sort of funny gag panels about my experiences in art school.
Well, right. The first one appeared in 8 Ball number 7 in 1991, right? But it was very short.
It's very short, and it's really not about a character, and it doesn't have a narrative at all. It's just kind of, funny vignettes about art school. And so here I was with this character and all these other characters that I didn't quite have a handle on. So I actually got a sketchbook and started drawing pictures of each of these guys and getting what they would wear and what their hairstyle was. And, once I did that, then I could write it immediately. I knew them immediately because that's sort of my crutch.
Whose idea was it to go forward on this? To say, like, these small panels, let's use the title, let's flesh it out, let's make a movie?
Terry was the one. I just sort of, after we'd started working on Ghost World, Terry said, let's think of something else. And I said, well, look through my stuff, see if there's anything that grabs you. And he really was drawn to that. He likes to do things about artists. He's really interested in artists as characters.
Cool. Jerome is basically an outsider.
Yeah.
So his character journey includes him having Bardo to kind of get him into the scene.
Right.
Could you talk about just coming up with how you built your structure? And most importantly, I mean, the first 30 minutes or so are just an outright blast of a comedy. And then tonally, it completely shifts into a much more serious movie. So could you talk about your decision to go that route?
It was, I tried to do it somewhat organically. And to me, that was sort of the way my experience was in art school. I started out, it was sort of this fun, frivolous thing. And then at a certain point, you kind of have to follow through on your convictions as an artist, and you have to sort of take it seriously. And I wanted that character to have this feeling of, he's in this kind of fun, crazy world all of a sudden, and then he's got to actually, to succeed, he's got to make these choices, and he gets some very hard choices. And to me, that's the interesting part of this film, or of the dilemma of the character, is that to be in that world and have to kind of figure out as an artist how to kind of navigate. Do you navigate towards success? Do you do what it takes to be successful, or do you do your own thing and be ignored, and to kind of deal with those ego problems that come with that, and I tried to give him all these, kind of characters that represented each of the different ways he could go, and he has to sort of navigate through those. And I think I tried to sort of take the premise seriously and follow through on it.
But up until that point, you almost don't, though, because it's definitely a laugh.
No, it's an inherently funny world. I tried to
right.
I didn't exaggerate much of the humor at all. I mean, it's really, I think all those characters read as archetypes to some degree, but they're all very much based on real experiences I had in art school, and it's
including the kind of jock guy that just has natural talent.
Yeah. The guy we had wasn't actually talented, but he was absolutely the oddball in the class. But he just looked like a guy who would have been at a country club in Orange County or something. He was he'd wear golf pants, and he did work that was absolutely uninfluenced by the current art world, and he was such an oddball, and yet in the real world he would have been the normal one, and we were all the weirdos. And so it made us have to sort of rethink, are we really nonconformists, because we all look alike, and he's the actual nonconformist in the bunch.
Blazing quick questions, because we're running out of time. Your Raiders of the Lost Ark, the three kids who are remaking it shot by shot, is that going to happen based on a real life story?
I am. I just turned in the first draft, so
great.
We will see. Everybody seems very excited about it.
Master of Space and Time, another project based on the Rudy Rucker book. What's going on with that?
That should never have been announced as something that's really, an official project, because it's just something Michel Gondry and I have become friends, and we've talked about it, but it's not like we've actually done any work on it. We just, have some crazy ideas. It would be a lot of fun.
I would love to see what you guys come up with, because his film.
It would be a lot. Excellent. Yeah, I love Science of Sleep. No, I would love to do it, but it's that's certainly not going to happen right anytime soon.
How do you manage your time now between comics and screenwriting? Do you have like a preference towards screenwriting now?
No. It's comics are just sort of part of. It's like a habit I can't ever break. I mean, it's sort of the way I see the world, and so I do a little bit of comics every single day. Whether I have to stay up an hour later or whatever. But I've been working on some comic stuff for a while now. It will still be a while before it ever comes out. But I do the screenwriting sort of as a hobby rather than a day job.
One of our listeners in England named Richard Cosgrove wrote in a question because he knew we were going to be doing this interview. His question was, do you need to live in LA to write? And if you don't live in LA, how do you become a screenwriter outside of LA? You live up north.
Yeah.
What's your perspective on that?
You certainly need to come to LA to do meetings if you want to do films with studios. I mean, you have to be able to meet with people and pitch things. So you have to certainly be willing to take a few trips. But I really don't see why you'd need to live in LA. It makes it easier, certainly. I have to come down all the time for meetings, and it kills a day. Whereas if I lived here, it would just be a drive across town. But for the most part, you're sitting in a room writing. I can't imagine why you would really feel like you had to live here unless you really wanted to ingrain yourself in the culture and sort of meet people and know people and do it that way. But I've never been very good at that.
So you could write anywhere with an occasional visit to LA to make sure your writing could be seen by the right people.
Yeah, of course, getting started is the hard part. That I have no advice. I just had a lucky break. That's.
What's your habit like for writing? How many hours a day would you say, and what's your workspace like?
I have an art studio basically, so I sort of work at a little desk I've had, for cutting out paper for years, and I find I can work only in 2-hour increments for writing, and then it's what I do is no good. So, and it takes me about a half hour to warm up for that. So I tend to work in sort of 3-hour chunks. And
any particular time of day?
I have a 1.5-year-old, so usually when he takes his nap, I work for a couple hours, and then in the afternoon for a couple more hours, and then after dinner, I usually work for 4 or 5 hours.
So you take breaks, but you just kind of on
it's
and
kind
off.
of just on and off. I'm just home all day. I'm just in my studio. So
obviously, you're really talented visually. Did you ever do any storyboards for any of these films? I mean, because you easily could have, right? Or the comics could serve as storyboards.
Yeah, the comics actually don't work as storyboards because it's a very different kind of storytelling. We learned that with Ghost World. The cinematographer is really kind of studying the comics, and we realized that it's not the same kind of staging at all. It's a very subtly different and enough to be really confounding. But with art school, Terry and I just bought a dry erase board, and we sat in his studio and figured out very crudely storyboards for each scene. Because I had, having written it, I had a certain idea of, where characters enter and who's on what side as the dialogue's given. And, I have to think visually from doing comics. And so I had that all in my head, and Terry was often wondering what I had in mind. And often I would tell him, and he'd say, oh, well, I didn't picture it that way at all. And he'd erase it quickly. but sometimes, he'd go, oh, now I see what you mean. And he would actually use it. And the cinematographer came in and would take a little picture of the board, and then we'd start over.
As a screenwriter, how important is it for you to be visual, to kind of see in your mind what you're about to write? I'm guessing because your comic experience, it's a pretty important part of your process.
To me, it's, I can't imagine how it would be to write a screenplay if you didn't think visually, because it's really about that. It's about sort of the spatial dynamics that you see on the screen. And so I think that's why a lot of novelists have trouble making the transition, because they're so used to being able to write in descriptions. I mean, most of the best novelists are really all about narration and description, and not about dialogue necessarily.
You were a co-producer on this film. How did that come about? What were your new responsibilities?
Well, it was just on Ghost World. I wound up kind of being there the whole time and doing a lot of stuff on set. Sort of Terry kind of let me art direct Enid's room because he didn't quite get exactly how it would look, and so I wound up doing that, and I wound up doing artwork for the art class, and just sort of this general background detail noodling kind of stuff. And then after I was done, I told somebody, and they were like, well, you must have been a producer on the film. And I was like, well, oh no. And so on this one, I said, well, if I'm going to do the same thing, can I be a producer? And they all said, oh yeah, sure. I didn't know you wanted to be. So, and I'm not even sure why I did want to be. It's just,
I would just kind of, they compensate.
No, they actually don't.
Really?
No. But
that's wrong.
But it was, it's kind of cool to say, hey, so I'm a producer. Now I can meet girls at parties and tell them I'm a producer.
Dude, that's pretty hip.
Yeah.
Why did you and Terry not co-write this? Like you did on Ghost World. How'd that decision come about?
When we wrote Ghost World, it was very much. It started out, we were really collaborating, and then Terry doesn't really enjoy writing very much, and I kind of took to it, and so he would really just sort of come in with ideas. He'd go. I remember him one day, he came in and he said, what if, he said, last night I was driving and these people were walking in front of me really slowly, and I got really mad and I started yelling at them, and you should have a scene where Seymour does that. And I said, yeah, but Seymour doesn't have a car. We don't have any scene in a car at this point. And he's like, yeah, figure that out. And so, of course, I had to sit down and okay, Seymour has a car, and had to completely rewrite the whole movie. And so it was more like, he was like a documentary filmmaker, which is what he is, bringing in scenes and just say, here, you figure it out, get it in the film. And so I sort of did more of the kind of nuts and bolts writing. And kind of by the end, I was really just sort of the writer on it. So I thought for this one, he could certainly give me as many ideas as he wanted as a director, but I wanted to not have to, collaborate. It's much easier for me to do it myself.
Was there anything you guys never saw eye to eye on that you agreed to disagree?
There have been a few things that I I really liked that if I were the director, I would have put in a film. But ultimately, I always know it's Terry's film, and he's got to respond to it. And when I wrote Art School, I very much wrote with Terry in mind. I really gotten a kick out of making him laugh on Ghost World, and there were certain things he really responded to, and certain things he was sort of didn't quite get. And I really wanted to make something that he would get really excited about and want to be involved in.
Was there anything wild and crazy like the sitcom that was cut out of Art School? Like the sitcom in Ghost World that was cut out of Art School?
Like that kind of thing. That was interesting. There wasn't a whole lot of background ADR stuff in Art School. It's not the same kind of world where they're all...
Or maybe a subplot, just something that was in your script that you guys just had to totally lose.
There were a million little gag kind of things. There was one that was just too complicated to set up that I really wanted to put in just because it was a real thing that happened in Art School that I thought was really funny. It was this kid was like a speed freak, and he one day went out of his mind and just trashed his room, including all his roommates' stuff, like just smashed his roommate's TV and stereo, and it was just a heap of stuff. And then after he kind of woke up and kind of sobered up and realized what he'd done, he decided to bring in his teachers and try to hand it in as his assignment, like that this was his art. And one of the teachers actually was like, this is actually valid, and gave him, some kind of passing grade. I thought that would be a great little thing to put in, but it required such a complicated setup with this character you'd never see otherwise that we couldn't figure out a way to do it without taking up 15 minutes.
Just again on the tonal shift, was that something that you and Terry discussed a lot? Because when I saw it at Sundance, a lot of people were talking about it because it really is like a classic comedy, and then it slightly becomes another movie. The other movie's still funny, but it definitely has a tonal shift. Was that just not something you guys were worried about in the beginning, or was it something that you had a lot of discussion?
We definitely discussed it, and it was something that we both felt strongly about. It's certainly an idiosyncratic thing, but it's a very fine line. It's a fine line, and to me, it sort of encompasses what Terry is about. He's very much about this kind of broad humor, but also about this kind of emotional tragedy kind of thing, and we wanted to move in that direction. To me, it was sort of the logical way to tell the story, and he was absolutely the instigator for it. He was really, that's the way he wanted to go with it.
Was the murder subplot in the comics, like in the original?
No, there's no story in the comic. The comic isn't even a story,
right?
Yeah.
Because it's too short, basically.
Yeah, it's literally not a story. It's just it's like a Mad Magazine article.
So when did that come into the process? Like the whole campus killer?
That was very early on. We had the idea early on that we wanted to make kind of a noirish, sort of an exploitation film. We wanted to have all the elements of an exploitation film. I was kind of influenced by the film High School Confidential,
right,
which has a very similar kind of plot, and yet I wanted to sort of play it out in a much more serious way. So,
last quick question.
Yes.
Now with your second movie in the can, what would you say you've learned as a writer during the process, as a screenwriter? In particular, how have you seen your writing changed?
I think I've just learned sort of the stuff that not to waste your time with. I think there's a lot of stuff, especially on Ghost World, that I wrote that I later, that was later not used, and I spent an awful lot of time trying to get through that. And I think now I sort of know after a few days of working on a scene that this is not going to make it into the final film, and so I have a sense of what sort of to stay working on the stuff that's really essential and is actually going to be part of the story. And I think that's been the most valuable thing I've learned.
And just because it seems like we have another minute, could you pitch that Raiders project to our listeners around the world? Because it really cracks me up.
It's based on a true story. There were these three kids in Mississippi in 1981, right after Raiders of the Lost Ark came out. 12 years old, decided to do a shot-for-shot remake of the entire film on beta video, like the lowest grade video. And
highest grade of the day.
Highest grade of the day. They did have a very fancy camera at the time. And over the course of 7 years, I believe, until they were 18, they laboriously made this film with every shot from the movie, including, they built a giant boulder out of fiberglass, and they did all the stunts that in the film would have actually been, heavily padded stuntmen. In this film, it was, a 15-year-old being dragged behind a truck at 35 miles an hour on a gravel road. You can just see his legs being, ripped up by the gravel. I mean, it's like watching the real movie almost. It's like the people really doing these things, and it's a very moving film because it's actually a record of these kids' adolescence on film. You actually see them grow up during the course of the film. You see,
it took how many years to make?
It took 7 years, and you see actually the kid's first kiss is recorded on film, and it's really a very moving thing, and their background story is just so interesting. So it's really a story about these guys making this film, and to me it's one of those very few kind of real life stories that has all the elements I look for in a story.
Do you have a title yet?
We don't. I don't. I'm not very good with titles, so to me that's sort of more of a marketing decision. So I just call it Untitled Raiders Project.
Right on, man.
We'll let some genius figure out a real title.
Well, thanks a lot for your time today, and congrats on Art School Confidential.
Thank you.
And that's how it went down for our first one-on-one podcast with comic book writer, artist, and screenwriter Daniel Clowes talking about his film, Art School Confidential. We thank Dan for his time and can't wait to get him back to talk about his future projects. And speaking of future projects, don't doubt it, you can get your questions answered here as we plan to do some more one-on-one interviews with screenwriters Josh Olson, who wrote History of Violence, The Grudge screenwriter Steven Susko, Wedding Crashers co-writers Steve Faber and Bob Fisher, and Mission Impossible 3 co-writers Alex Kurtzman, Roberto Orsi, and possibly even J.J. Abrams. All you have to do is put the name of the film in the subject line of an email, send off your question to rsvp@creativescreenwriting.com before May 15th, 2006, and I will do my darndest to ask your question, and then you could tune in to see if your question was asked in a future podcast. Of course, tell us the city that you're writing from and your full name. You can also check out our website at www.creativescreenwriting.com, and we hope you'll keep an eye out for our new issue of Creative Screenwriting Magazine hitting newsstands now with the Da Vinci Code on the cover, featuring full interviews of that film, also Superman Returns, X-Men 3, and of course Mission Impossible 3. I'm Jeff Goldsmith, Senior Editor for Creative Screenwriting Magazine, thanking you for tuning in, thanking you for clicking that subscribe button in your podcatching software to give us such a high ranking that we've been getting lately, and also thanking you for leaving us good reviews and voting for us at podcastalley.com. I'm of course looking forward to chatting with you again soon in the next few weeks, so stay tuned.